I've kept my mouth shut for 3 years because who's going to believe a bootlegger who saw Bigfoot? But after what happened during that storm, I can't keep quiet anymore. I still run my stills, still live alone in these same woods. But everything changed after that night. Everything. Let me back up and tell you how this whole thing started. My property sits deep in the Appalachian Mountains, about as far from civilization as you can get without actually disappearing off the map. That's exactly why I chose it 15 years ago when I was looking for a place to set up shop. When you're running an illegal operation like mine, you need 3 things: distance from neighbors, thick forest cover, and good spring water. I've got all 3 on my 40 acres of mountain land, and for 15 years I didn't have a single lick of trouble. No raids, no competitors, no problems. Just me and my stills and the forest. The nearest town is about 30 miles away down a winding mountain road that turns into a muddy nightmare when it rains. I've got maybe 3 neighbors within 10 miles, and they keep to themselves like I keep to myself. That's the unspoken rule out here. You don't ask questions, you don't cause trouble, and you definitely don't talk to outsiders about what your neighbors might be doing on their land. It's a good system. It works. My cabin is nothing fancy. 1 main room with a wood stove, a smaller bedroom, and a little porch where I sit most evenings. The roof was tin until the storm, and the walls were solid logs I'd cut and chinked myself. I built the whole thing with my own hands over the course of 2 summers, working mostly at night after I'd finished my rounds checking the stills. It's not much, but it's mine, and it's paid for with money that doesn't go through any government books. I run 3 stills in different spots across the property, which is standard practice for anyone in this business who knows what they're doing. The main one's about a 1/4 mile from my cabin, tucked into a hollow where the trees grow so thick you can barely see sky even at noon. That's where I do most of my production, where the biggest copper pot sits over a carefully maintained fire. The setup took me months to perfect, getting the temperature just right, finding the sweet spot where the mash ferments properly without turning sour. The second still is near the old creek bed on the eastern edge of my property. It's smaller, more experimental. I use it to test new recipes, try different grain combinations, see what works and what doesn't. The water from that creek is particularly good, cold and clean even in summer, which makes a difference in the final product. That still is hidden under a natural overhang of rock, invisible unless you know exactly where to look. The third one's way out past the ridgeline, at least 3/4 of a mile from the cabin. That's my backup, my insurance policy. If something ever happened to the other 2, I'd still have one in operation. It's the hardest one to reach, which means it's the safest. I only check it a couple times a week unless I'm running a batch through it. Spreading them out like this makes sense from a business standpoint. If a law enforcement ever did find one, they'd probably figure they got lucky and wouldn't keep searching for others. But it also means I'm hiking all over this mountain every single day, checking mash, adjusting temperature, making sure the copper tubing hasn't sprung a leak or gotten clogged. I've worn paths through these woods from 15 years of daily rounds. I know every tree, every rock, every change in elevation, or at least I thought I did. I'm completely off the grid out here. Got a generator for power when I need it, while water that's cold and clean. Grow most of my own food in the warmer months. Maybe go into town once a month for supplies I can't make or grow myself. Otherwise, it's just me in the forest. That's the way I like it, or at least that's the way I liked it before all this started. My typical day starts before dawn. Check the stills, test the mash, make adjustments, chop firewood, tend the garden, make my rounds again in the afternoon. By evening, I'm usually sitting on my porch with a jar of my own product, watching the sun go down through the trees. Simple life, quiet life. The kind of life where you notice when things change. About 4 months before the main event, I started noticing things were off. Little things at first. Tools I'd left by the woodpile would be moved to the other side of the cabin. Barrels I'd stacked one way would be rearranged. My firewood stack looked like someone had been rummaging through it. None of it was stolen, just moved around. My first thought was thieves, maybe rival moonshiners scoping out my operation, trying to figure out my setup before they made their move. That happens sometimes in this business. People get jealous, they get greedy, they think they can just waltz in and take what you've built. So I started being more careful, keeping my rifle close, staying alert. Then I found the footprints, massive things, easily twice the size of my boot, pressed deep into the mud near my mainstill. I figured it had to be fake prints, like those joke boots you can buy online that leave Sasquatch tracks. Somebody trying to scare me, make me think there was something out here. I actually laughed about it at the time. Real clever, I thought, real original. But then came the sounds at night, heavy footsteps circling my cabin, not the light patter of deer hooves or the shuffling of a bear. These were deliberate, measured footfalls that shook the ground. I'd grab my rifle, throw open the door, and fire a warning shot into the air while screaming about trespassing and private property. Whatever it was would scatter into the trees, and I'd hear it crashing through the underbrush as it ran. This became a pattern. Every few nights, the footsteps would return. I'd yell, I'd shoot, they'd leave. But they always came back. Always, and during the day, I'd find more evidence that something was messing with my operation. The wooden cover over one of my mash barrels moved aside. Copper tubing at the second still bent at an odd angle. More of those massive footprints everywhere. After a few weeks of this pattern, things escalated in ways that made my blood run cold. I started seeing shapes moving through the trees during daylight hours. At first, I thought it was my imagination playing tricks, or maybe the morning mist that sometimes hangs in the hollows, creating shadows that look like movement. But no, these were actual figures, and they were massive. 7, maybe 8 feet tall, dark and hulking, moving between the tree trunks with a strange grace that didn't match their size. The first time I got a clear look at one, I was checking my eastern still just after dawn. The mist was still heavy, hanging in white sheets between the trees. I saw movement about 50 yards away, and my first thought was bear. We get black bears through here sometimes, especially in late summer when the berries are ripe. But this shape was wrong. Too tall, too upright. It moved on 2 legs, not 4. I'd chase after them whenever I spotted them, screaming my head off about getting off my land, about trespassing, about how I'd shoot first and ask questions later. They moved fast, way too fast for how big they were. I'd crash through the underbrush, trying to keep up, my rifle banging against my back, branches whipping my face and arms. But they'd disappear before I could get a clear look. 1 second they'd be there, a dark shape between the trees, and the next second they'd be gone like smoke. The only thing I could see for certain was that they were enormous, not just tall, but broad, built like they could tear a tree out of the ground with their bare hands. And there was something about the way they moved that didn't seem human. Too fluid, too coordinated in rough terrain that would have me stumbling and cursing. My still sights kept getting disturbed. I'd find mash barrels opened up, the lids set carefully aside. The copper tubing at my second still was bent so badly I had to replace the whole section. This wasn't random animal damage. This was deliberate. Somebody or something was messing with me, and they were doing it on purpose. I got paranoid, started sleeping with my rifle next to the bed, set up tripwires with bells around the cabin perimeter so I'd have warning if anything approached, cut back on my drinking because I needed to stay sharp. The lack of sleep was getting to me, making me jumpy, making me see things in shadows that probably weren't there. Or maybe they were there. That was the problem. I didn't know anymore. One morning I walked out to find a deer carcass on my porch. It had been butchered cleanly, professionally even, with the hide and organs removed. Just good meat left behind, laid out like an offering. I stood there staring at it, my mind trying to work through what this meant. Bears don't butcher deer. People don't leave anonymous gifts of venison. What the hell was going on? Near my main still, I found stones arranged in a deliberate pattern. 3 stacked on top of each other, then a line of 5 more leading toward the trees. It looked like a marker or a sign, but for what? And then came the vocalizations, deep, resonant whooping sounds that echoed through the forest at dusk. They didn't sound like any animal I knew. Too controlled, too purposeful, almost like communication. Part of me started to wonder if maybe these weren't human intruders after all, but I pushed that thought down hard. Bigfoot wasn't real. Sasquatch was a myth, a campfire story, something bored hikers made up to explain weird sounds in the woods. I'd lived in these mountains my whole life. If something like that existed, I'd have seen it by now. So I convinced myself it was elaborate pranks, maybe a group of people trying to scare me off my land, or competitors in costumes trying to make me abandon my operation. That had to be it. The alternative was impossible. It all came to a head on a late afternoon in October. The air had that crisp quality it gets in autumn, and the leaves were just starting to turn. About 6 in the evening, still enough light to see clearly, though shadows were getting long. I was at my cabin, sitting on the porch with a jar of my own product, when I heard crashing sounds from the direction of my furthest still, the one way out past the ridgeline. That's a half-mile hike through dense forest, uphill most of the way, and whatever was making that noise wasn't being subtle about it. I could hear trees shaking, branches snapping, the heavy thud of something moving fast through the underbrush. It sounded like a whole group of people, or maybe a herd of deer spooked by something and running in panic. I grabbed my rifle and took off running. Something snapped inside me in that moment. I was done with this. Done with the games, done with being scared in my own home, done with whatever lunatics or pranksters or rival moonshiners thought they could terrorize me on my own property. I was going to catch them this time, confront them face to face, and end this once and for all, even if I had to shoot somebody, even if it came to that. The run up that mountain was brutal. My lungs burned, my legs screamed in protest, but I pushed through it. I'd made this hike thousands of times, but never at a full run, never with this kind of desperate urgency. I leaped over fallen logs, crashed through stands of brush that tore at my clothes, splashed through a narrow stream without breaking stride. Then I saw them ahead of me through the trees. 3 figures, massive and dark, moving together like they were coordinating. They were at least 7 or 8 feet tall, maybe more, with shoulders so broad they had to turn sideways to fit between some of the tree trunks. Their bodies were covered in dark hair or fur, making them blend with the shadows even though the light was still good. I started yelling, firing warning shots over their heads. The crack of the rifle was deafening in the close confines of the forest, echoing off the trees. Birds exploded out of the canopy, cawing in alarm. Small animals scattered in every direction. "Get off my land! I'll shoot to kill next time. I mean it. I'll put a bullet through your skull." They didn't slow down. They didn't even look back. They just kept moving, flowing around obstacles like water, impossibly fast for their size. I'd thought I was in decent shape from all the hiking I did every day, from the physical labor of maintaining 3 stills and chopping firewood and hauling water. But I struggled to keep up. My lungs burned like I was breathing fire. My legs turned to rubber. Sweat poured down my face, stinging my eyes. But I kept going, driven by something beyond reason. Anger and adrenaline and 3 months of accumulated fear, all mixed together into a toxic cocktail that shut down my better judgment. Branches whipped my face and arms, leaving stinging welts. My rifle banged against my back with every step. I tripped over roots and rocks but caught myself before falling, never stopping, never slowing. I could hear them crashing through the underbrush ahead of me. Their footfalls were like thunder echoing through the forest floor, shaking the ground with each step. It felt almost geological, like small earthquakes tracking across the landscape. Trees swayed as they passed, small branches snapping like twigs under their weight. Whatever these things were, they were powerful beyond anything I'd ever encountered. The chase went on for what felt like forever, maybe 15 minutes, maybe 20. Time felt weird, stretched out by exertion and fear and the pounding of my own heartbeat in my ears. I lost track of exactly where I was, just kept following the sounds and the occasional glimpse of movement through the trees. The forest had become a blur around me, just obstacles to navigate around or crash through. Then suddenly, one of the shapes stopped in a clearing ahead. Just stopped dead, turning to face my direction. The other two kept moving, disappearing into the trees, but this one stayed, waiting, like it was challenging me to catch up, daring me to see what would happen when I did. I raised my rifle. This was it. I was going to at least wound it, prove to myself these were just people in costumes, people who could bleed and hurt and run away like anyone else. I burst through a thick stand of bushes into the clearing. Then something hit me from the side. It felt like being hit by a truck. One second I was running, the next I was airborne, flying sideways through the air. I slammed into a tree trunk hard enough to knock every bit of air out of my lungs. The world spun, tilted, went dark at the edges, then it went completely black. I don't know how long I was out. Could have been minutes, could have been hours. Time didn't exist in that black void. When I finally started coming back to consciousness, it was slow and painful. First, just awareness that I existed. Then awareness that I was in pain. Then, gradually, sensory information started filtering back in. The light had changed. Sunset colors filtered through the trees overhead, all orange and purple and deep red. The sun must have been almost down, which meant I'd been unconscious for at least 20 or 30 minutes. My head felt like someone had split it open with an axe and then used it for a drum. Every heartbeat sent spikes of pain through my skull. I tasted blood in my mouth, thick and metallic. When I ran my tongue over my teeth, I felt a sharp edge where I'd chipped one. Every part of my body ached. My ribs felt bruised or cracked where I'd hit the tree. My left shoulder was screaming at me, probably dislocated or at least badly strained. My hands were scraped raw from trying to catch myself when I fell. I could feel wetness on the back of my head that might have been blood or sweat or both. I reached for my rifle with instinctive desperation. It was gone. That fact penetrated my foggy brain slowly, bringing a fresh wave of fear. My rifle, my protection, my equalizer, gone. I tried to sit up, but the world spun so violently that bile rose in my throat. I had to lie back down and close my eyes, taking slow, careful breaths until the nausea passed. I tried again more slowly, pushing myself up on my elbows. The world tilted and swam, but it didn't spin quite as badly. That's when I saw it, about 10 feet away, completely still, watching me. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. It tried desperately to make sense of it as something normal, something that fit into my understanding of the world. A boulder, a dead tree stump, some trick of the failing light, and my concussed brain working together to create an illusion. But then it moved, just a slight shift of weight from one foot to the other, and I understood with horrible clarity what I was looking at. The creature was easily 8 feet tall, maybe more. It was covered head to toe in dark reddish-brown hair, thick and matted like an animal's coat. The shoulders were massive, the arms hung down past where its knees would be. tree trunks for arms, hands the size of catcher's mitts. But the face was the worst part. It was almost human. Almost. The nose was flat and wide. The brow was heavy and pronounced. The jaw protruded slightly. But the eyes were what got me. They weren't animal eyes. They were intelligent, aware, watching me with what looked like curiosity or maybe concern. The Bigfoot just stood there, breathing slowly and evenly. Its chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm. Behind it, leaning against a tree, was my rifle. The creature made no move toward it, made no aggressive motion at all. It just watched me, and I completely lost it. I started screaming, not words, just raw sound, the kind of noise that comes from pure primal terror. I scrambled backwards on my hands and feet, slipping on leaves and dirt, my injured body protesting every movement. The Bigfoot didn't move, just kept watching me with those two intelligent eyes. I kept scrambling until my back hit a fallen log. Nowhere left to go. I was trapped, and this thing was going to kill me. This was it. This was how I died, alone in the woods, torn apart by something that wasn't supposed to exist. The creature took one slow, deliberate step forward. I pressed myself against the log, trying to make myself smaller, trying to disappear. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might explode. Every muscle in my body tensed. I was going to die. I was going to die. Then the Bigfoot stopped. It slowly lowered itself into a crouch, moving with careful precision like it was approaching a frightened animal. Which I guess I was. When it was down at my eye level, it extended one massive hand toward me, palm up. The gesture was unmistakable, universal. It was offering to help me up. I stared at that hand. It was enormous, with fingers as thick as my wrists, and a palm that could probably palm my entire head like a basketball. The skin was dark and leathery, surprisingly human-like under all that hair. The creature kept its hand extended, patient, waiting. I shook my head frantically and kept trying to crawl backwards over the log. The Bigfoot didn't follow, didn't force the issue. It just stayed there, crouched down, hand still extended. Then the creature tilted its head slightly, studying me. Its mouth opened, and it spoke. Help. The voice was impossibly deep, like gravel and distant thunder mixed together. The pronunciation was crude, the single syllable drawn out and accented strangely. But it was unmistakably a word, English, spoken language. I stopped moving. My brain couldn't process what had just happened. This thing talked. This thing talked. That wasn't possible. It wasn't real. I was hallucinating from the head injury, or I'd already died, and this was some kind of afterlife weirdness. What? I whispered. The creature repeated the word, help. Then it gestured to me, then to itself, then swept its arm around to indicate the forest surrounding us. It was trying to communicate something, but I was too shocked to understand what. We stayed like that for several minutes, frozen in place. The Bigfoot crouched down with its hand extended, me pressed against the log, both of us just looking at each other. My mind raced, trying to make sense of this. This thing spoke. It understood language. It was trying to help me. Slowly, the creature lowered its hand and sat back on its haunches. It pointed at my rifle leaning against the tree behind it, then made a braking gesture with its hands, snapping an invisible stick. No. Shoot, it said. I understood. The rifle wouldn't work anymore. It had been broken, probably when I was knocked unconscious. The Bigfoot had taken it, disabled it, then set it aside. Not as a trophy, as a safety measure. Then it pointed at itself and tapped its massive chest. No, hurt. It pointed at me. You hurt? Then it swept its arm to indicate the forest again. Scared. And just like that, I understood. They weren't attacking me. They were defending themselves. All this time, with all my yelling and shooting and chasing them through the woods, I'd been the threat. I'd been the aggressor. They'd been scared of me. My voice came out cracked and raw. I didn't know. I thought you were thieves. The creature seemed to understand, or at least it nodded slowly. It pointed toward where my stills were located, or the general direction anyway. Water? Smell? It made a face, clearly disgusted by the alcohol smell. Then it gestured at the forest, the trees all around us. Home. Then it pointed in the direction of my cabin. Your home. The message was clear. We live here too. This is our home. You and us, we share this forest. My adrenaline was wearing off, and with it came the full force of pain from my injuries. My head throbbed, my ribs ached, my wrist felt sprained. The Bigfoot stayed sitting where it was, making no move to come closer. It just watched me with those disturbingly intelligent eyes. Movement at the edge of the clearing caught my attention. Another Bigfoot appeared between the trees, slightly smaller than the first. I tensed, but it just stood there watching. The first creature made a low rumbling sound, and the second one stayed back at the tree line. "How many of you are there?" I asked, not really expecting an answer. The creature held up one massive hand, fingers spread. 5. A family group living in these woods that I've been terrorizing for months with my guns and my yelling and my complete lack of awareness. We spent maybe an hour in that clearing as darkness slowly fell. The Bigfoot used simple words, gestures, and facial expressions to communicate. It showed me by pointing at the forest and putting a finger to its lips. Forest, quiet. Then it pointed at me and made an explosive gesture. You, loud. It made shooting motions and shook its head. Scared animals, scared us. The creature stood and walked to a tree, pointing at deep claw marks gouged into the bark. Our place. Then it swept its arm in a wide arc, showing me the extent of their territory. It pointed at game trails, at patches of berries, at a distant ridgeline, all areas where I had stills or regularly hunted. "I've been tearing up your territory," I said quietly. The Bigfoot nodded. "Yes." The creature stood and gestured for me to follow. Every instinct I had screamed at me to run, but curiosity won out. I got to my feet, wincing at the pain, and followed the Bigfoot deeper into the woods. It led me to a cave opening, partially hidden by fallen logs and thick vegetation. Inside, I could see nesting material, carefully arranged leaves and moss. A young Bigfoot, maybe an adolescent, watched us nervously from the darkness. The creature gestured at the cave. "Family. Here." Then it led me to a spring bubbling up from between some rocks. Crystal clear water, cold and clean. Water, clean, no smell, meaning not contaminated with my moonshine runoff. This was their water source, and I'd been poisoning it. We walked further. The Bigfoot showed me game trails I'd never noticed, berry patches and clearings I'd walked past 100 times, places where edible roots grew. It kept repeating the same basic message in its limited vocabulary. Share, forest, you take, we take, both live. As full night fell, the creature led me back toward my cabin. It moved confidently in the darkness, never stumbling, always knowing exactly where it was going. My eyes had adjusted somewhat, but I still had to move carefully to avoid tripping over roots or walking into low branches. We stopped at the edge of my property line. The Bigfoot pointed at my cabin, barely visible through the trees. "You, careful, sky, angry." I didn't understand. "What do you mean?" It pointed up at the sky, then sniffed the air deeply. "Water, falling, big wind." The creature looked at me, making sure I was paying attention. Tomorrow. Storm. I looked up. The sky was clear, stars visible through gaps in the tree canopy. No sign of weather coming in. But the Bigfoot seemed certain. The creature started to walk away, then turn back. It had been carrying my rifle this whole time, and now it handed it back to me. No. Need. We. Friends. I took the rifle, nodding slowly. Friends. The Bigfoot touched his chest and made a sound, a deep rumbling that sounded like Maka. It seemed to be a name, or at least an identifier. I gave my first name in return. The creature tried to repeat it, the pronunciation rough and heavily accented, but close enough to be recognizable. Then it turned and disappeared into the trees, moving silently despite its enormous size. I stumbled back to my cabin in a state of shock. My body moved on autopilot, opening the door, lighting the kerosene lamp, collapsing into a chair. I examined the rifle. The firing pin was bent completely out of shape, useless. It would never fire again without serious repair work. I sat on my porch until dawn, unable to sleep, unable to process what had happened. Bigfoot was real. Bigfoot could talk. Bigfoot had a family living in my forest, and I'd been terrorizing them for months. As the sun came up, I looked at my property with new eyes. My stills were poisoning their water. My gunfire was scaring away game they needed to survive. My daily routines were destroying their home. I'd been treating this forest like it was mine to dominate, mine to use however I wanted. I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Shame. Deep, gut-wrenching shame. I decided right then that I was going to move my main still, put it somewhere that wouldn't contaminate their water supply. The weather was still clear, beautiful even, and I'd completely forgotten about the storm warning. I spent the morning dismantling my main still and moving it to the far corner of my property, a good distance from where the Bigfoot family's territory seemed to be. It was hard work, especially with my injuries, but it felt necessary. While I worked, I saw shapes moving through the distant trees. They were watching me, but they didn't approach. I waved at them. After a moment, they seemed to wave back. It felt surreal, waving at Bigfoot like they were neighbors checking on a construction project. By afternoon, the sky started to change. Clouds rolled in from the west, thick and dark. The temperature dropped. The air felt heavy and electric. I remembered Maka's warning about the storm and started securing everything. I covered the stills with tarps, moved equipment inside, made sure my generator was protected. It started around 6 in the evening, and when it started, it didn't mess around with a gentle buildup. One minute the sky was just dark and threatening. The next minute, all hell broke loose. The wind hit first, massive gusts that bent the trees at impossible angles. I could hear them groaning and creaking under the strain, the sound like 1,000 doors on rusty hinges, all screaming at once. Then came the rain, not a drizzle, not even a normal downpour. This was water falling from the sky like someone had opened a dam. It hammered on the tin roof so hard I couldn't hear myself think. It came at the cabin from all sides, driven horizontal by the wind, finding every crack and gap in the walls. Within minutes, water was seeping in around the windows, dripping through places I didn't even know had openings. Thunder crashed directly overhead, so loud it felt physical, like a punch to the chest. The whole cabin shook with each blast. Lightning lit up the world in strobing flashes, turning everything into a nightmare landscape of stark shadows and brilliant white light. In those flashes, I could see the trees outside bending nearly double, could see sheets of rain thick enough to be solid walls of water. My generator cut out with a sputter and a cough, plunging everything into darkness except for the lightning flashes. I fumbled for my kerosene lamps, nearly knocking one over in the pitch black. My hands shook as I lit them, and the warm glow they cast seemed pathetically small against the violence raging outside. I settled in to wait it out. I'd weathered storms before. Mountain storms could be fierce, but they usually blew themselves out pretty quick. This was just weather, just nature doing what nature does. It couldn't last more than an hour or two at most. I tried to convince myself of that as the cabin groaned and shuddered around me. But it got worse. The wind picked up even more, if that was possible, until it was screaming through the trees like some kind of demon. It found every tiny opening in the cabin, whistling and howling through gaps I'd never noticed before. Rain came at the walls horizontally, then upward as the wind swirled and eddied. The temperature dropped fast, going from comfortable to bone-chilling in minutes. I could hear trees breaking, not just branches snapping, but entire trees coming down. Massive cracks like rifle shots, followed by earth-shaking crashes as 100-foot pines toppled over. Each one made me flinch, made me wonder if the next one would land on the cabin. The forest I'd lived in for 15 years was being torn apart around me. My cabin started to shake on its foundation. Not the trembling it had been doing, but actual violent shaking like something was trying to tear it off the ground. I could hear timbers creaking, could feel the floor shifting under my feet. This wasn't normal. This wasn't just a bad storm. This was something else entirely. A massive crack of lightning hit so close I saw it through my closed eyelids, brilliant and blinding. The thunder came at exactly the same instant, no delay at all, a sound so loud it felt like the air itself was being ripped apart. My ears rang. For a second, I couldn't hear anything at all, just a high-pitched whine. Then an enormous crash. A huge tree, had to be at least 3 feet thick at the base, came down directly onto the side of my cabin. I felt the impact through the floor, through my bones. The tree smashed through the tin roof like it was paper, tearing a gaping hole 10 feet across. Branches punched through into the main room, bringing leaves and bark and torrents of rain with them. The whole structure shuddered and groaned. Rain poured in through the gaping hole, wind howling like something alive and hungry. I grabbed tarps and tried desperately to cover the opening, but it was hopeless. The tarps just whipped out of my hands, caught by the wind and sucked out into the storm. Water was everywhere, soaking everything, turning the floor into a shallow pool. I grabbed tarps and tried to cover the opening, but another branch crashed through, breaking one of the main support beams. The cabin started to collapse on one side, tilting at a crazy angle. Water was everywhere, flooding in faster than it could drain out. Another branch crashed through, this one breaking one of the main support beams that held up the roof. I heard it crack like a gunshot, saw it splinter and give way. The cabin started to collapse on one side, tilting at a crazy angle. My kerosene lamps fell over, and I had to scramble to keep them from starting a fire. Everything was sliding toward the damaged wall. I grabbed my emergency supplies, waterproof bag with food, water, matches, my best knife. Had to get out. The cabin was coming down, and if I stayed inside, I was going to be buried. I headed for the door, slipping on the wet floor, catching myself on furniture that was sliding around. That's when part of the roof came down. I heard the groan of timber giving way, looked up, and saw a section of ceiling collapsing toward me. I tried to dive out of the way, but wasn't fast enough. A beam caught me across the shoulders, driving me to the floor. More debris piled on top. I was pinned. My leg was trapped under a fallen roof beam, wedged at an angle that sent spikes of pain up my spine every time I tried to move. I pushed at the debris with my hands, but there was too much of it, too heavy. Water was rising around me, already up to my elbows, and it kept coming. With the cabin tilted like it was, everything flowed to where I was trapped. I was going to drown. The realization hit me with absolute clarity. I was going to drown in my own cabin, trapped under debris, killed by the same storm that Maka had warned me about. The water was rising fast, minutes, maybe 5 minutes before it reached my face, and I couldn't breathe anymore. I pushed and pulled and twisted, ignoring the pain, but the beam wouldn't budge. I heard something over the roar of the storm, heavy footfalls on the porch, deliberate and powerful. Then my door was literally ripped off its hinges, the wood splintering like it was made of cardboard. A massive shape filled the doorway, water streaming off its fur. It was Maka. The Bigfoot waded through the flooded cabin toward me, moving debris aside like it weighed nothing. When it saw me pinned under the beam, it didn't hesitate. Maka grabbed the fallen beam with both hands. Its muscles stood out even through the thick fur, veins visible on its forearms. It lifted the beam like it was a fallen branch, holding it steady while I scrambled backward and pulled my leg free. Then the Bigfoot let the beam fall and turned to follow me out. We stood on the porch for maybe 2 seconds before another tree cracked nearby, falling straight toward us. Maka grabbed me around the waist and ran, carrying me like I was a child, moving through the storm with sure-footed confidence. The rain hammered down so hard I could barely breathe. Wind tore at us from every direction. Trees were falling everywhere, massive shapes looming out of the darkness and crashing down. But Maka never slowed, never stumbled, just kept moving through the chaos like it could see a clear path. We arrived at the cave I'd seen earlier, the one with the nesting material. The rest of the Bigfoot family was there, sheltering from the storm. They made room immediately, pressing back against the walls. The young one brought me dried grass to sit on, arranging it carefully. The family surrounded me, their massive bodies blocking the wind and rain that tried to reach into the cave. Their body heat kept me warm. I sat there, soaking wet and shivering, while outside the storm continued to rage. The storm lasted all night. I sat among the Bigfoot family, watching them interact. They communicated in low rumbles and gestures, occasionally checking on me to make sure I was okay. One of them brought me food, berries and roots, and some kind of dried meat. It didn't taste great, but I ate it gratefully. Maka sat nearby, vigilant, watching the cave entrance. The others moved around each other with clear familiarity. A mother grooming her child, 2 adults exchanging what looked like affectionate touches. The young one curling up against the largest Bigfoot to sleep. They were a family, not monsters, not animals, people, just different from me. Dawn broke with sudden quiet. The storm had passed, leaving behind a devastated landscape. We emerged from the cave to find trees down everywhere. Some were as thick as my torso, snapped like toothpicks. Branches and debris covered everything. We made our way back to my property. My cabin was still standing, but barely. One whole side had caved in completely. The roof was mostly gone, but the basic structure remained. It could be repaired. The Bigfoot family immediately started helping. They moved fallen trees like they were nothing, their strength incredible to watch. We salvaged what we could from inside the cabin. They found tarps in my shed and helped me cover the gaping holes. Together we secured the unstable sections, making it safe enough for me to stay in. When we finished, I instinctively put out my hand for a handshake. Maka looked at my hand, confused at first. Then understanding seemed to dawn. The Bigfoot reached out and took my hand in its massive palm, shaking awkwardly but earnestly. The gesture felt important somehow, a real connection. Over the next few days, we worked together to rebuild. The Bigfoot family helped me clear debris and repair the worst damage. I showed them which of my supplies they could use. We established a new understanding. I moved all my stills to locations they marked as acceptable, places where the runoff wouldn't contaminate their water sources. They showed me better spots, areas where the land naturally filtered anything before it reached their springs and streams. They taught me which plants were important to them, which ones I should leave alone. I learned to recognize the berries they harvested, the roots they dug up, the trees they used for shelter. In return, I shared food from my stores. They brought me fresh game sometimes, always cleaned and prepared. We developed a system. They'd visit the cabin sometimes, usually in the evening. I'd leave offerings at their den occasionally, things I thought they might need or enjoy. We learned more of each other's communication. They taught me words in their rumbling language. I taught them more English, danger, food, water, friend, family. My whole perspective changed over those weeks and months. I started seeing the forest differently, not as a resource to be exploited or a hiding place for illegal activity, but as a living thing, full of intelligence and intention. Before, it had just been trees and rocks and dirt, obstacles and opportunities. Now I saw it as a complex web of relationships, everything connected to everything else. I noticed things I'd never paid attention to before, despite living here for 15 years. Animal paths and how they changed with the seasons, shifting when food sources moved or when predators established territories. Bird calls and what they meant, the alarm cries when a hawk passed overhead versus the territorial songs in spring versus the feeding calls. The subtle signs of weather changing, the way the wind shifted direction before a storm, the way certain birds flew lower when rain was coming, the smell of the air when snow was on the way. The Bigfoots taught me to move quietly through the forest, to place my feet carefully and shift my weight slowly so I didn't snap twigs or rustle leaves. They showed me how to observe rather than intrude, how to sit perfectly still for an hour and just watch what happened around me. I saw more wildlife in my first week of practicing this than I'd seen in the previous year of crashing around with my rifle. They showed me how they harvested without depleting resources. When they took berries, they never stripped a bush clean, always left plenty for birds and other animals, and for the plant itself to spread seeds. When they dug roots, they carefully replanted the tops so new growth would come back next season. When they hunted, they took only what they needed and used every part of the animal, wasting nothing. It was sustainable in a way my own practices had never been. I applied these lessons to my own life. I reduced my still output significantly, making only what I needed to survive and pay for supplies. No more overproduction, no more waste. I stopped shooting randomly into the woods, stopped using my rifle as a noisemaker to scare things away. I only hunted what I would actually eat, and I started using all the parts of what I killed instead of just taking the choice cuts. The forest seemed to respond to these changes. Within months, I saw more deer, more turkey, more of everything. The trees looked healthier somehow, though I couldn't pin down exactly why. Birds nested closer to my cabin. A family of foxes denned not far from my property line. Everything felt more balanced, more in harmony. And my stills actually produced better shine using less mash, because I was paying attention to the process instead of just churning out volume. We established clear boundaries, unspoken rules that both sides understood and respected. The Bigfoot family wouldn't approach when I had visitors, which was rare anyway. Maybe once a month, someone would drive up the mountain road to buy a few jars of shine, and during those times, I'd see no sign of the Bigfoots at all. It was like they could sense when other humans were around, and they'd just disappear deeper into the forest until the coast was clear. I wouldn't go near their den unless invited, unless I saw the signal that meant they wanted me to come. They'd leave 3 stones stacked in a specific spot on my property line, and I'd know they needed to show me something or wanted my help with something. It happened maybe once every couple weeks. We created other signals for different situations. A twisted branch left hanging at eye level on a specific tree meant they needed me to stay away from a certain area for a while. Maybe they were hunting there. Or maybe one of the young ones was practicing skills and needed space. I'd respect that signal and change my daily routes. If I needed help, like when I was trying to move a particularly heavy piece of equipment, I'd stack 3 rocks near my cabin, and within an hour, Maka or one of the others would show up. The system worked smoothly because both sides wanted it to work. We had mutual respect, mutual understanding that this forest was big enough for all of us if we just paid attention to each other's needs. This was their forest as much as it was mine. More so, actually, when I really thought about it. They'd been here long before I showed up with my stills and my rifles, and they'd be here long after I was gone. Sometimes in the evenings, they'd visit. I'd be sitting on my rebuilt porch and I'd see them emerge from the tree line, moving cautiously at first, then more confidently when they saw I was alone and relaxed. They'd sit on the porch steps or on the ground nearby, and we'd share food. I'd bring out whatever I'd cooked for dinner. They'd bring berries or roots or sometimes fresh game they'd caught. We didn't talk much during these visits. They couldn't speak English beyond a few dozen crude words, and I never got the hang of their rumbling language beyond basic concepts. But we didn't need elaborate conversation. We'd just exist together in companionable silence, watching the sun go down, listening to the forest sounds. It felt more natural than most conversations I'd had with other humans. I realized this was how it should have been from the start. If I just paid attention, just listened to what the forest was telling me, none of the conflict would have happened. But I've been too caught up in my own concerns, too focused on my operation and my survival to notice I was destroying someone else's home. It's been 3 years now since that storm, since the night Maka saved my life. My cabin is fully rebuilt, actually sturdier than it was before. I used better materials this time, reinforced the roof supports, put in stronger beams. The Bigfoot family helped with the heavy lifting, and they seemed to understand instinctively how structures should be built. They'd shake their heads and grunt disapprovingly when I tried to cut corners, and they'd reposition beams until everything was solid and square. I still run my stills, but the operation looks different now. Just one still running at a time usually, producing quality over quantity. I move them all to locations the Bigfoots marked as acceptable, places where runoff wouldn't contaminate their water sources or interfere with their foraging routes. My production is down by maybe 60% from what it used to be, but my profit is actually higher because the quality improved so much that people will pay premium prices. Word got around that my shine was the best in the mountains. I live carefully now, sustainably, with an eye toward the impact I'm having on the land around me. Every decision I make, I think about how it affects the forest, how it affects the Bigfoot family, how it affects all the other creatures that call this mountain home. It's not a burden, it's just a different way of thinking, one that actually makes life simpler and more satisfying. The Bigfoot family is still nearby, still thriving. The young one from that first night in the cave is nearly full grown now, massive and powerful like its parents. It started bringing its own offering sometimes, showing the same care and consideration that Maka showed me 3 years ago. The cycle continues. They're completely comfortable around me at this point. Sometimes they'll sit on my porch in the evening like I mentioned, and we'll share food and just exist together in companionable silence. Other times I'll be working at one of my stills and I'll hear that familiar rumbling call, and I'll look up to see Maka watching from the trees, just checking in, making sure everything's okay. They've taught me so much over these 3 years, how to predict weather by reading the sky and smelling the air, the same way Maka predicted that storm. I can now tell 24 hours in advance when rain is coming, can sense temperature changes before they happen. They taught me which plants have medicinal properties, which leaves can be made into a tea that helps with pain, which roots can settle an upset stomach, which bark can be chewed to clean your teeth and prevent infection. They taught me how to navigate the forest in complete darkness, using touch and sound and smell instead of sight. I can walk from my cabin to any of my stills now on the darkest night without a flashlight, just feeling my way along, reading the terrain through my feet. They taught me how to move without leaving traces, how to step on rocks and roots instead of soft soil, how to avoid breaking branches or disturbing vegetation. And I've taught them things too, knowledge that flows both ways. Basic first aid for cuts and injuries, how to clean wounds with clean water and pressure, how to make bandages from cloth, how to recognize signs of infection, which human foods are safe for them to eat if they find them or if I offer them, and which ones will make them sick. They're curious about human food, always asking about new things I cook. I taught them how to avoid the rare hikers who pass through this area, how to recognize the sounds of humans from far away, how to identify game trails that humans might use versus the ones that are too rough for most people to navigate. We worked out signals they could use to warn me when strangers were approaching, giving me time to hide any evidence of my stills before anyone got close enough to see. I've never taken photos, never tried to prove they exist. I know what would happen if I did. People would come, researchers, hunters, curiosity seekers. The peace would be destroyed. The Bigfoot family would have to leave, find somewhere else to live. And this forest, this perfect balance we've achieved, would be shattered. I decided to share this because I'm getting older. My body doesn't move like it used to. Eventually, I'm going to have to leave this mountain, and when I do, I want people to know what's possible. This isn't about proving Bigfoot exists. Honestly, I don't care if people believe me or not. This is about showing that coexistence is possible. That nature isn't something to dominate or conquer. It's something to understand and respect and work with. I was so wrong in how I approached this forest. I treated it like it was mine to use however I wanted, with no thought for what else lived here. All my aggression, all my shooting and yelling, it came from fear and ignorance. I didn't understand what I was dealing with, so I responded with violence. When I finally stopped and listened, when I finally paid attention to what the forest was trying to tell me, everything changed. I gained more in those moments of understanding than I'd gained in 15 years of taking what I wanted. If you see signs of Bigfoot in the woods, don't chase them, don't threaten them. They're not monsters, they're not dangerous unless you make them defend themselves. They're just trying to survive, same as everyone else. Show them respect, give them space, and maybe, just maybe, you'll learn something incredible. Maybe there's a lesson in that for all of us, about how we treat the natural world, about responding to the unknown with curiosity instead of fear, about understanding that we're not the only intelligent beings on this planet. I'm sitting on my porch right now as I finish telling this story, the same porch that's been rebuilt stronger than before. The sun is setting through the trees, painting everything in shades of orange and gold and deep purple. It's that perfect time of evening when the day animals are settling down and the night creatures are just starting to wake up. The forest is transitioning, full of quiet sounds and subtle movements. At the tree line, maybe 50 yards away, I can see Maka standing there in the shadows, just standing, watching, like the Bigfoot has done hundreds of times over the past 3 years. We've done this dance so many times, it's become a comfortable ritual, a way of acknowledging each other at the end of the day. I nod, Maka nods back. Then the Bigfoot fades into the forest, moving silently despite its enormous size. In a moment, it's gone, like it was never there. I raise my mason jar of moonshine in a silent toast, to unlikely friends, to lessons learned the hard way, to the forest and everything in it. I take a sip and settle back in my chair. The forest is quiet around me, but it's not empty. It's never been empty. I just didn't know how to see it before. Now I do, and that's made all the difference. For more interesting stories, check this out.